So I'd like to welcome each and every one of you this evening, and on behalf of myself, Bob Ives, and on behalf of the Old Bristol Historical Society, I'd like to not only welcome you, but thank you all very, very much for coming to the first of our 5 different summer talks about the Old Bristol Historical Society, speaking about Bristol and the history of Maine in general. So tonight we are very pleased to have 2 very prominent speakers and individuals about Old Bristol Historical, Neill and Phil. But before I introduce them, I'd like to make an apology to you all. And that apology is quite simply is that we publish posters that we put out everywhere. New Harbor, Round Pond, Damariscotta, and they're all wrong. So we're going to have to do something to the person who put them all out there and who did it. And you're looking at it. In any event, there's actually just 2 dates that are not quite right. The next, in 2 weeks' time, our second talk would have been Belinda Ozier doing Down Memory Lane, showing the slides of Marion Brackett, wonderful presentation. Wow. But that actually isn't until August 6th. In 2 weeks, on July 9th, there's a wonderful talk by Professor Joe Hall of Bates College. And Joe will be speaking about how names suggest Wabanaki history and presence in the state of Maine. So, speaking
including
about all
Pemaquid.
the kind of Native American names are all a very
how you doing?
July 9th, 2 weeks time, Belinda in August.
August what?
August 6th.
6?
6.
What time?
7 o'clock. All of the talks are right here except for 2. And there are 2 talks. One will be on witchcraft.
Oh,
And that was given last year, and there were so many people. There were over 35 people who were rejected.
Tad-
so we're kind of
Tad
doing
Baker?
Witchcraft Part 2. It'll kind of be built on what he said, and but we're going to do it in the church to be able to make sure witchcraft doesn't take over.
Right.
And the last talk will also, by Jim Nelson, will also be in the church sanctuary. It's a bigger kind of event. So tonight we're very grateful to have Neill Paoli and Phil Averill with us. Neill needs really no introduction whatsoever. Former professor, now manager of Colonial Pemaquid in his retirement. But Neill, as I'm often saying, Neill has dug up Bristol more than any person around, because he's been digging up Bristol for 50 years.
close.
In any event, so Neill is an archaeologist, and he will share with us tonight about the mill, about the history of the mill, kind of going back actually to the 17th century, but he'll be focusing on the Robert Gibbon Mill of the 18th century, and then the Oakman Ford Mill of the 19th century. So he'll speak about those in depth. And after Neill, Phil Averill,
You're going to be talking about Oakman, right? You're going to be talking about Oakman.
And it's Phil Averill who we really
Okay.
should thank for everything that's been happening. Not totally because everyone's been participating, but Phil was the spearhead when Hammond Lumber Company decided to sell the mill, or the actual lumber company, in July of 2018. It was Phil who was the spearhead, galvanizing people together to really purchase that historic property. And indeed, he formed a group called Friends of the Pemaquid Mill, and in 4 short months, we had raised over $400,000 to be able to acquire the mill and the mill property.
I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Nor did anyone else.
But Phil didn't stop there. He kept going. And for 4 years, over 4 years, he's been in charge really of the restoration and the rebuilding of that historic mill. So we're so deeply grateful for Phil. And Phil will share a little bit about that restoration and rebuilding of the mill, and then a few of the hopes and dreams and visions we have for the future. So, those are our 2 wonderful speakers. Will you join with me in giving all the
Thank you. I'll just preface this with sort of a little side. This is not going to be dramatically different what I've talked about in the past by virtue of two things. One, probably the most important thing, is that I've been busy with other things, so I'm relying on my old research, but I have done some snooping around on foot and have some potentially interesting stories to add to that. But anyway, before I get going with this, I'd like to tip my hat, and more than tip my hat, to acknowledge Gene and Al Rotner. Two people who I got to know quite well over the last, since the late 90s. And I really miss them very much, as do I'm sure a lot of other people do. If it weren't for their generosity as far as opening up their property, their sense of good humor, particularly Al with his dry sense of humor, and Gene with always offering a seat to sit in her place. I dropped by, I don't know how many times over the years, to just visit with her. And actually, within about a month before she died, I stopped to see her, and I'm glad I made that last visit. But definitely, I miss her and miss Al. So they did a lot for the town. They did a lot for that site. The fact that Nancy, too, apparently is holding on to the property, I see that as a very important part of it, what hasn't been dug up, both as far as the Native American story, of which there's a lot there, and as far as the historic period. So that said.
Neill, can I simply say that Nancy is here tonight?
Oh,
so we're very,
great.
Very grateful to have Nancy.
Thank you.
With us. So sorry, didn't we?
Yep. So hats off.
Mr. June.
Oh.
So why don't we move on to the first slide? So most of you have seen this picture before at one time or another, but essentially this is just giving you a feel for the Pemaquid River itself. This is where I work most of the time, but I've done lots of work upriver, and actually 2 years ago I started work on a couple of sites due to generosity of some other landowners up in Fawcett's Cove, where there are two more 17th century sites, homesteads, but ticking away very slowly. Anyway, we go upriver, and here is the given site and the shipyard site, two sites that I dug on and are somewhat interconnected. But before we get into that time period, we want to jump back a good 100 years to maybe the 1650s. At that point, Pemaquid has been in existence as an English settlement. Keep in mind, Native Americans were living there as far back as about 7,000 years ago, and up until even the time of settlements and beyond. But anyway, Thomas Elbridge, who was the last son of Giles Elbridge, who was the junior partner of the two men that originally purchased the Pemaquid patent in 1626, when it's actually formalized in 1632. And with that emerges a settlement that is focused on fishing, cod fishery, of which you guys are, I'm sure, well aware of, and the timber industry. And then thirdly, the fur trade industry. And that's what kept the place going in the 1600s up until the late 1680s. It turns out that Pemaquid, where Colonial Pemaquid is, was the heart of the whole plantation. There were 7 villages. Pemaquid Falls was the main farming village in the 1600s, for obvious reasons. If you look at the property, particularly Nancy's property, is flat as a pancake and rich as can be, and right adjacent to the Great Falls, 3 sets of falls that would have been attractive to English, Europeans, and Native Americans alike for somewhat similar reasons. Anyway, by 1651 or thereabouts, Thomas Elbridge has moved from England to New England. And he's a classic story of a guy who was land rich and cash poor. What had happened is that he was caught up along with his brother John and then his father Giles, the English Civil Wars. And they were on the wrong side of the fence. They supported the crown itself, and essentially Bristol was hit pretty hard, and they lost a lot of financial resources. But he inherited this huge chunk of land. And so by 1650, 1651, he's moved to New England, and he situates himself, from what I can tell from the research I did in my dissertation, up at Pemaquid Falls. That was roughly when that farming village starts as an English operation. But again, one of 7. So when people visit Colonial Pemaquid, they think this was the early settlement. Yes, it was, but it was only part of it. And we know about, or I know about 4 or 5 families that lived on both sides of the falls. One of which was my guy, Thomas Giles, and his son, John Giles, who I've spoken about in the past, and I'm still gathering information and filling that out in my manuscript. But anyway, he owned 2 pieces of property. Thomas Giles sets up shop in Pemaquid Beach, kitty corner to where Nan and now the late Mike Dodge have their summer place. Most of you folks familiar with that location?
Yes.
Okay, it's just a stone's throw from the tower, the fort's tower. And I know that based on a document, I can't count very well, that makes reference to the property that Giles owned up at Pemaquid Falls and is deeded to him in, I think, the early 1680s, 500 acres. And it also makes reference to his property and to his house lot at Pemaquid Beach. Not only that, but John Cartland, my predecessor in the late 1800s and early 1900s, uncovered a area of paving that is kitty corner to the Dodge Cape. Not right there, but close to it. And I'm almost positive, based on that in this deed, that was part of the Giles's property. The cobble paving probably surrounded their house. Anyway, we don't have any real smoking guns, but we have suggestions as far as a mill operating up at the Great Falls by sometime in the late 1600s. Aside from what I've laid out, we know that there was 5 or 6 families living there, including Thomas Elbridge. We know, secondly, that there is a reference in the history of Bristol and Bremen, and most of you people may have, or some of you people may have come across that, and that makes reference to a 10-foot wide canal that was discovered by the resettlement folks, the Scots-Irish that began filtering into mid-coast Maine in this case, by the 1730s, 1740s. And that canal was filled with trees, there were trees growing out of it. So you think, a canal? Prior to their presence, who's living in between 1689, the end of Pemaquid, and the resettlement in 1730? Nobody aside from the Native Americans. And so that's what got me digging there in 1984, and on what then was I referred to as the Burroughs Fields. The Burroughs family owned that place, which Alex Baudet now owns and has a pretty successful farm stand there. Came up with nothing. I mean, we came up with artifacts, but nothing that cried out, this is this mill site. But that's part of the game. We have access to a lot more equipment. I don't have it myself, but electronic equipment, geophys, we refer to ground penetrating radar, soil resistivity, et cetera, that could give us a closer look at that. But that's probably will not happen in my professional lifetime. Anyway, the second key to this suggestion that there was a mill there is that in the 1984 again, a guy by the name of Bill Marshall found, when he was doing a project that was supposed to be recording ballast piles all up and down the Maine coast, of which never really went very far. He found a little wee boat, or a little tiny carved boat that's about this long. I wrote a little piece on that, that actually is part of 50 Objects of Maine History that Maine State Museum published, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. And it's a great book. Forget what I put in there. There's a lot of great stuff there. It covers it from essentially Father Rail and prehistory too, up to present day. So it's well worth a look at and well worth a purchase if you're, come across it. Anyway, we had a maritime historian look at that in England, and he basically was pretty confident that that little boy was late 17th century. So you have people here by the 1650s, English folks were there by the 1650s, by the mill site itself. We had this little boat down on where the shipyard was operating. And thirdly, you have a water source, a good power source for that. So it to me cries out. Now, again, suggestive, but that's where we are. From there, we move into the mid-1700s. Still, again, most of the focus in Pemaquid is on Pemaquid Beach and then Fawcett's Cove, the east side of the river, about half a mile from Pemaquid, Colonial Pemaquid. And Robert Given, who is one of the Scots-Irish folks, his father, David, came up from Pejebscot, or modern-day Brunswick, in the 17 teens, settles up in Newcastle, and then they work their way over to Pemaquid Beach, of which the Nichols do also the same kind of thing in this rough time frame. Robert Given, as far as I know, was living in this location again by 1761. And why don't we move on to the next slide? And the next one after that. Here's the Great Falls, not looking so great. This is in September, and as most of you know, that typically in this part of Maine in July and August, it gets quite dry, and the water drops. This year so far has been a lot different. This is probably the second rainiest June I've experienced in Maine since my teenage years. But anyway, that's okay. We'll stay there. So Robert Given set up, and we'll see this in a minute, if I can relocate, right where the cellar hole is there. And that guy behind the camera there helped me on at least one occasion scything the hay and the grass on the site itself, and we broke our backs and worked up a good sweat, and I actually worked there in the last field school in 2011. But anyway, what we found there was the cellar hole to Robert Given's house, and that was pointed out to me by Gene. And Nancy, did you ever hear anything from your mom or your dad prior to me meeting them about the cellar hole?
No, just the things that you found.
Yeah. Yep. So anyway, that was something that I had gotten from her, and then she had made reference to also, she was pretty sure that the annex, if you want to call it that, to the right, if you're looking at the Cape, Nancy's Cape now, the main core of the house is to the left, was supposedly sitting on that site. If that's the case, when it was moved, don't know. So that's something that may, again, people like Peter and others collecting stories, myself early on, of old timers, roads, cellar holes, families, this and that, Indian trails, may have some of that stuff squirreled away in the archives, in your archives, the OBHS, and in the meeting house, Harrington Meeting House. I don't know how much of that stuff has been moved. Is any of it, or is it still? Okay. Anyway, so there's a wealth of stuff there, and in the town hall and in Lincoln County Courthouse. So there's stuff there that's another day that I could talk about. So what we found there was a lot of material associated with Robert Given and his wife, Sarah. And he lives until 1796. She continues on the property until 1819. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to quickly grab my transcription of his probate inventory, but it's pretty interesting. He has a quarter interest in a schooner and in a sloop. So no surprise there, because he actually earlier in his life starts out as a mariner. So that he may well have had something going on in the shipyard site prior to Oakman Ford's investment in the mid-1840s. He also has, there's a reference in that to cloth shears and tubs or kettles, I'm assuming to clean sheep's wool. And there is a reference, and unfortunately in my haste to get out here, there's one reference in either his probate, and I couldn't find, I don't think it was, or in Sarah Given's probate, 1819, to a fulling mill.
To a fulling.
Fulling mill. A mill that is basically processing wool into clothing and various other items. Where that was, since it seems more and more that my original hunch that the mill that you guys are working on is probably more like the 1820s. And then the turbine itself, very interesting, when I was trying to get more information, that came across one of these town, not reports, I'm blanking out right now, in the excuse me? Registers. Thank you, registers. 1882, open up the book, and there is like a identical image of the turbine that you see there now that I watched for years. Now I'm jumping way ahead, but anyway, that is really neat. You know exactly when that was probably manufactured. When I had my field schools on site, one of the things we always did was to walk over to the mill to sort of set the table for the students. And for a while there, we talked to Craig Lehman, who was living memory of the early years in the late 1960s, I think is when he started. And he would let me open up the trap door until it was nailed shut for safety reasons. And you could see down to the quote unquote cellar, I refer to as the mill itself. And a lot of interesting stuff. Many times I walked down there, snuck down there, whatever you want to call it, just trying to take pictures and all this kind of stuff. The next slide. And we're going to jump ahead through this. So I've talked a little bit about that, but we're going to have to move ahead. So keep moving. We've gotten through that. Okay. So Henry Fawcett House still stands today. Okay. And this is Robert Given's house, presumably at an earlier state, much smaller than what you would have seen based on the archaeological evidence. And there is the sawmill, which drove me crazy because it didn't line up with the cellar hole that we found. And I kept pulling my, well, is it we shot that in wrong, or it's actually another structure, or they shot this in wrong, blah, blah, blah. And it's most likely the fact that there was a mill slightly upriver, probably on the other side of the bridge that we see today. Okay? Now, that may well have been also where the fulling mill was. As we know, you can have more than one operation in a mill, and as we know, based on the mill that Oakman Ford and probably John Miller, or Thomas Miller, excuse me, that marries into, or is related to Sarah Given. There's a tie in there in the 1830s. So that's my hunch right now, is where the fulling mill might be. Over the years, again, thanks to your mom, I would walk when the water was high, when it was low, across the river from her property, and she used to refer to, and did she ever talk about the bridge and the, what was it, the upper fresh, the low, let's see, the fresh?
Big Fresh.
Big Fresh, Little Fresh, and Mama Fresh, no. Anyway, there was a pedestrian bridge that Jean, in her early stringers, thank you, would walk across.
Yeah.
And she also made reference to, when she was, I think, a teenager, that the dog get out of the house and zipped over to the mill pond, and they were trying to get it back before the dog went under. And apparently one of the pools or whatever rescued the dog. But one of these interesting side stories that gives you a little sense as to, in her lifetime, that mill was still, at that point, sort of hobbling along as an operation. And also, what I've done, thanks to Alex Baudet, is I've walked his property several times in the last 2 or 3 years, both when it was overgrown and less so. And if you walk down from where all the lumber, what's left over the lumber for the fish, the fish ladder, thank you. You keep going down there, maybe another 100 feet, and it takes some doing because there's trees there, there's stuff. But anyway, I was able to make out a depression, and it was not a natural, it doesn't seem to be a natural depression to me, and then several large boulders that ran right to the edge of the river. Okay, now this is, again, roughly from what I call the Great Falls, which is right where all the stonework is. Maybe, in this case, maybe it's more like 100 feet, 150, 200 feet. And then I looked across on what would be the west side of the river, and there was another mound there with several boulders there. And there's an interesting reference in, again, one of the Johnston or the other history of Bristol Bremen, and I'm blanking out, having another old man cramp, where they talk about a mill dam downriver. Now, what the antiquity of that is, I don't know, but it's definitely something that's worth exploring. So I think you have more, fairly confident, more related to the mill operation, maybe Thomas Miller, Oakman Ford era, maybe earlier than that, and then up on the other side of the road, but that's speculative too, just based on what I've seen. And then there's also another cellar hole on the east side of the river, roughly in the area that I've walked in, that's about 40 by 15 or 20. And the property owners, I think, are Alex friend that runs the good.
Oh, Catherine and Carl.
Yes, Carl, thank you. That may be, but they were, whoever I spoke to said that they might be receptive to, if need be, to some archaeology. But anyway, so I'm going to leave it at that. So there's a lot of question marks, but there's some promising things out there suggesting that we may have another look at a earlier fulling operation in this case, and possibly Robert Gibbons' still missing sawmill. So anyway, that's my piece. We have a little bit of time. Questions at the end, or let Phil go, or how do you want to do that?
Yeah, Neill, why don't we have about 5 minutes of questions for Neill, and then after Phil, we can have a free for all.
And I have some flyers too, and I'll talk about that later on briefly, for our big event in mid-July that some folks might be interested. But anyway, feel free. Questions, comments, ideas? Yes?
When is this map from?
That's 1763. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. Yeah, usually I put it on there. Anyway, that's just my transcription of the map, and that's just came out of the Lincoln County Courthouse records. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have to.
Oh, yes. Do you want this, Phil?
I don't know.
The pointer? There it is.
Okay. Wait a minute, it's too close to the button here. There.
I'm going to kind of pick up where Neill left off. You'll have to excuse my movement. I do have Parkinson's disease now, so I'm going to try and stay as steady as I can. But we get involved in the mill and trying to figure out when the mill was built. We don't know. Probably never will. But somewhere in the low 1800s, this guy, Thomas Miller, came to town, and we think he built the mill that we are refurbishing now, at least built part of it. It's obviously 2 or 3 buildings put together. They loved to do that back then, is move these buildings around, take them apart, put them together. The Poole Brothers retail store was actually moved down from Fir Hollow up the road a piece. And and Gene Rotner's house, as Neill mentioned, was moved across the street from the mill site. So it's hard to say something was built at a certain date. But there was a bunch of intermarriages and family inheritances. Thomas Miller married Hannah Given. Get back to the Givens again. And then when Mrs. Given died, Thomas Miller was a nice guy handling the estate, and he ended up with the farm and the mill. So he died in 1831, and his wife and his son inherited half of the estate, and the other sons and daughters got the other half. And at that point, he had set up a carding, had a mill building, and had the water rights to run the mill. So there seems, 1831, there seems to have been a going mill operation at that point. 1822, this guy named Oakman Ford arrives from Massachusetts, lives in Bristol Mills. He and his brother tried to do a business. They had the mill right behind the town hall. And that didn't work out. They couldn't get along with each other, just like my brother and me. And so then Oakman Ford's wife died. She's buried in the cemetery in Bristol Mills, right across the street from the town hall. And he marries Sarah Miller, Thomas Miller's daughter. And he moves to Pemaquid Falls, where she lived. And he buys some more land from the Miller family, builds the house that later gets moved across the street. And he ran the mill and a barn and a store, and he was the postmaster for 27 years. 1865, getting up to Civil War time, Oakman died, passed the mill on to his son, William. And what he passed on includes the house, the store, the barn, the mill building, the saw, the mill, the grist mill, the fulling mill. He was a busy guy. In 1888, there was the new wheel. And we know there was a water wheel, a regular conventional overshot water wheel running that mill. But they called this the new wheel. We found out that even the turbines were called wheels. And we think that's when the present turbine was installed. It was 1888. They were selling that type of turbine in that time period. So Oakman Ford's son, William, brought his brother-in-law, William Boyd, into the business. So it became Ford and Boyd. And they were very busy carting wool, cutting lumber, shingles, making lath for plaster walls, plus a grist mill. We have one deed that refers to a carding mill as being a separate piece of property. So they apparently had a carding mill, but it wasn't at the mill. We don't know what it was, but it's the last line of a deed. It says they had a carding mill operation in a separate building. 1910, Boyd dies, and Ford sells the mill to Oberton and Crawford, two guys from Warren, Maine. They had a portable mill in town, and they were doing a lot of cutting around town, buying wood lots, cutting them off, running the logs through the mill. 1923, Oberton dies. The mill is sold to a local grocery store guy named Chester Poole. We finally made it. So old Chester went into the mill build business. And he brought his brother in, William Poole, to make
Poole Brothers.
Poole Brothers. They were brothers. The mill was in full swing, mostly sawing lumber, both at the mill and with the portable mill. Pools had a portable mill, had 2 portable mills as well. Just as a side note, we have that mill. I was talking to Harold Dawson, and he says, you know, that the portable mill the Poole brothers used to have, I know where that is. And it was on a farm up in Newcastle. And we went up and bought it, and that's what the one that's sitting beside the mill now is be part of the display once we get things
You
together.
also have a frame to that I found about 20 years ago in the basement.
And in the
I
basement,
don't know if it's
there's,
still there.
Yeah.
Part of the frame. Still
Yeah.
portable.
right. It doesn't fit the portable that we have, though,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So then Chester Poole bought out his brother, and that led to Carl Sr., Chester Poole's son, who bought out his uncle and later his father. In 1968, they moved the house down from Fur Hollow. They lived upstairs, and the retail store was downstairs. And the last portable mill, oh, I see, wait, I read that wrong. So in 1987, Carl Poole Sr. passed away, and Carl Poole Jr., who we all know and love, and his sister took over. Then Carl bought out her half. And in 2005, Carl did all the expansion into Booth Bay and Damariscotta, all the stores that he owned. In 2005, La Valley Lumber merged with Poole Brothers. In 2011, Hammond Lumber bought out Poole Brothers. And in 2018, Hammond Lumber closed the Pemaquid branch of Hammond Lumber. That's when I got involved. We've learned a lot about the mill, how it worked, why it worked, and there's still lots we don't know about the mill. Our group has visited 7 working mills in Maine in the last year to see how other people handle working mills, what they do with them. And we're still learning how to do a mill museum. To see what we've been doing with your money, which we thank you for. Go back. Yeah, there you go. Does that look familiar? That's 1910. We know it's 1910, not because it has a date on it, but because that's the new high school built in 1910. You gotta be sharp to pick these things up. But that's the basically the mill we have now. We've added, they added another building right here. There's another building stuck onto the side of that building. But that's the mill. Looking from the other direction. They're north of Pemaquid Falls, looking back down the hill to the mill. That church became the library and then burned, and now it's site of the library.
So is that the same rough time frame?
So this is the early 1900s. I don't think it has a date on it. But it's been helpful for us to see what they will use. There's a sliding door here, and things like that. We're trying to figure out if those are shingles or vertical boards, because we're about to finish around that window. So little details like that are what we're working on now. Next. And that's how it looked when we bought it. You'll notice there are only 2 windows and there are 2 sliding doors. Next. 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 Oh, no, back up. I have to go back to the other picture. Anyway, well, go back one more. There we go. That had 2 windows. This has 4 windows. 1 sliding door, 1 people door. So it's a completely different arrangement. You go inside, look at the wall, you'll see these window frames are still there. So we have returned it to its original condition with the 4 windows and the 1 sliding door and the people door. Trying to recreate the original old mill. Okay. That's what it looked like when we bought it. This is the back of the mill. The parking lot's out here. This is the dam. This is the Pemaquid River. These are the buildings that have been taken down uphill, part of the Poole Brothers project. This bush here goes all the way up, goes in through that window. That's poison ivy. I have never seen poison ivy 3 stories tall. I cut that one down. So that's what it looked like in the back when we bought it. Next. That's the south end. This is the river here. And this work won't be done for another few years before we get to the south side. Next. But that's the back after we got done with it. This is the back of the mill. The river's over there. That's Belinda. And we had to completely remove the back of the building. We had a structural engineer survey this structure before we bought it. And they were saying, well, it's in great shape for a 200-year-old building. And there are 5 posts that go from the roof down to the ground to support that back. And they said, oh, this posts are in great shape. And so we took one out to do some work on it, and it was completely hollow. All there was a ring of wood around the outside. And all 5 posts were the same way. So our carpenter, Ed Blakelock, who's an amazing craftsman, we were so lucky to get him, built a temporary wall about 5 feet inside the building and took all that stuff out and put in all new lumber. Next. This shows the temporary wall and then the posts that became the real wall. And these are the collar ties and rafters above. Next. This is upstairs, and we'll get to that in a minute. But what I really want to show you is that. That's the scarf joint. These collar ties, I guess you call them purlins. These ties are 32 feet long, 1 piece of wood. The whole building is built that way. These would be 1 piece of wood until we got there and took the rod out. And so we had to replace some of the ends of the collar ties. But this amazing carving joinery that Blakelock did, it's just an amazing piece of work. And put back together with trunnels, with wooden nails. The upstairs, anybody know what that stuff is? Horsehair plaster. The upstairs, south wall and north wall are plastered. Why in the world would they plaster the second floor of a mill? We have no idea. One interesting thing about this second floor, though, there are no posts. It's completely open because they have these single pieces of wood going across, holding the walls up. And we got plaster on the walls. Either that was so they could heat it, or because they needed to make it clean, if they're processing flour or wool. I mean, we don't know. We've been reading all the graffiti on the wall trying to get a hint. They didn't let any hints out. But that's mostly what we've been doing, is work on the back side of the building that you guys couldn't see when you drive by. That's why we were glad to finally get around to the front side of the building. So look at all the work we're doing. We've been doing it for 3 years, doing stuff like that. Next. And that's Ed Blakelock and Audra Zobri. The two of them did most of the work. He had a crew of two other guys one year, and this year he worked alone for a variety of other reasons. But that's the two people that did most of the work on the building of reconstructing, getting rid of the rotten part. Next. This is the same backside again. Belinda's not standing there this time. This is the wall to the sawmill. It's a 40-foot long room, so you can saw logs in it. And we're trying to save all that boarding. And down there is the turbine. We still have the turbine. One of the reasons we got this property is because there was equipment inside. Right. That turbine is in fairly decent shape. And there's some saws under there, there's balers, other types of equipment that was worth saving. So that's really what we're after here. Next.
Did you keep the penstock that fed right into the turbine?
Yeah, that's going to be rebuilt.
Good.
Well, like I said, there used to be a water wheel.
Right.
We have to represent that. Then they changed to the turbine, which had a whole different way to bring the water in from the mill pond. So we have to represent that. And we haven't even started to think about this yet. But there are enough pieces of the penstock left that we can recreate it. And the penstock is the tube, basically, that brings water from the mill pond to the turbine. And it goes through the turbine, spins that, so that turns the shaft, which turns the pulleys, which turns the belt. And so we have all that. This is what the back of the building looks like now. Same picture again. The river's over here, the sawmill's over here. That's the turbine, close up. But it looks a little different now than it did when we had it all torn apart. Next. That's the portable saw. That is the original Poole Brothers portable saw. And they would, rather than taking the logs to the mill, they take the mill to the logs. It was much more efficient back in the day, once they get internal combustion engines rather than oxen. But
is the barn built using that mill down on that property? Went from there?
we think so.
It was.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a pretty...
Phil, that you keep calling it the portable mill, but it's unbelievable how heavy that is.
Oh, yeah. It was more than Alex Bodette's tractor could handle.
What ran that mill? What ran the mill? What did they use to?
They'd have a tractor.
Okay, hook it up.
It was that modern. So you can see the belt drive is there. They have a tractor of some sort. Next. I love this picture. This shows what they've been doing for the last 3 years at the mill that no one's been able to see. And it's the most fantastic thing going. These are the old timbers. You can see that they're rotting off. That's the brand new timbers. He's taking those and turning them into those. Got the mortar slots, tenons, and he's just carving those to match and just replacing the rotten wood with the good wood.
Where did those come from?
Yeah, I was just saying, where did they get those?
There's a number of mills available. He gets his from a guy in Brunswick. He lives in Woolwich, and he has a friend in Brunswick that has a sawmill. But yeah, that piece there is 32 feet long. And Ed and Audra just pick it up and walk away with it. It's amazing what they do. Not only that, once they get putting the mortar and tenon joints in, then they pick it up over their head and stick it in the wall where it belongs and hope all the joints come together.
Right.
It's amazing when they pick that thing up and put it in place, and when the joints go together, they squeak. They're so tight. This guy's incredible. We're losing him next week. He's been with us for 3 years. He does have other customers. And he's coming back. We have to raise some money to get him to come back. We're kind of flat right now. Next. A lot of work was done by volunteers. We've had a great crew of volunteers working together, hauling around the big timbers. They've been doing this for 3 years. And our volunteer crew is just amazing how much time and effort they put in. I'd start to name them all, but I'm sure I'd forget someone. But my volunteer list, I have 40 people on the list. They don't get 40 every time I ask for them, but it's still a good crowd of people. Especially that guy. Next. Next. So there we are today, or last week anyway. But looking down on the mill, we decided to use real cedar shakes for the roof, because that's what it used to have. This section was added in the 1940s, so they used asphalt shingles, so we use asphalt shingles. That's why those look different color, because they're different material. After the turbine had served its usefulness, in 1949 they changed it over to electricity. That's what ran this mill, was electricity. And there's the big motor, the three-phase electric motor is still there, and it's still hooked up and turns. And so when it comes time to turn the mill, if we ever get to that point, we have the electric motor that'll do it, that used to turn the mill. And I think that's why they added this room, because the electric motor's in there. Is there any more? That's the view that you guys get to see. This is all done now. Those shingles are 3/8 of an inch thick, twice as thick as a regular wall shingle. The shingles for that roof cost us $21,000. That's just the shingles, not the labor. So we're not skimping on materials. We're trying to be as accurate as we can be historically. We made a lot of compromises, just because you have to make it safe as a museum. But we're doing the best we can to be practical as well as being authentic, which upsets some of the purists. But what are you going to do? I like my sign. I found that at Elmo's barn. He had 40 of them. Come out of a mill someplace. Is there any more? There's one more. The turbine. Needs a little restoration. We've had a visioning meeting yesterday to kind of look ahead. Where do we want to go? Where do we want to end up? And the idea of reactivating this turbine to generate electricity came up again. And we have a friend that did it up in Union, and some of the people have gone up and seen his operation in Union. They want to generate electricity with water power. We'll see. I don't think there's enough WD-40 in the world to free that up. Is that it?
That's it.
So that's it. We've done incredibly well with our fundraising over the last 3 years. This town and you people have supported us beyond our wildest imaginings, but we're broke. We spent all that money, especially on these high-priced volunteers. But this summer we'll be looking for your continued support to keep this project going. We've gone so far now, we can't stop, turn around, so we got to get it done. And both for the mill and for the History Center, which is the old Toll Brothers retail store, and the grounds itself. It could be a nice little riverside park. But we're trying. Any questions? No questions? Yeah.
When you went around, whoever else went around and documented what was there for framing and stuff like that, when you discovered there were 3 other windows or
Right.
whatever, 2 other windows, is there written documentation
Yes.
of everything you found?
Yes.
Is that available?
Yes. Yes.
And photographic as well.
So it's about that thick.
Oh, good.
And it goes wall by wall. Before we did a thing, we documented the structure of every wall,
Yep.
all the different floors. And then as we reproduce that, we have the original plan to go by. So yeah, we've been doing it right. I wish we'd take more pictures, but
In the picture that you designated as 1910, with the high school behind, in front of the building where the parking lot is now,
right.
it was all water,
That was the mill-
logs in there.
that was the
and
mill
I
pond.
remember hearing something about that used to be a working
Right.
area, and that you guys found something underneath, or, I don't know what that purpose was, obviously, of holding.
What we found underneath was where the water wheel was.
Oh, okay.
That I'll make it a short story. There's a foundation under that building.
Right.
Foundation covers the whole building. That building was not built all at the same time. It was 3 buildings pushed together. How they got the foundation to be one foundation all the way around, I don't know. But anyway, in that foundation, there's a niche.
She's got the picture.
Yeah. So right under,
The center of the building.
right under that ramp, there is a niche in the wall, the exact right size for a water wheel. There is no shaft. There is no hole in the side to put the shaft in. There's no rust stains from a shaft. There's nothing to indicate that that was a water wheel, except for the fact that it's there. And there's a tail race. There's a place for the water to go after it goes through the wheel. It goes into a tail race and gets ducted back into the Pemaquid River. And there's a beautiful, incredible workmanship, stone tail race that has to be where the water came out. But then right here, that line right there is a pole that lifts up and down. That opens the gate to the Penstock, which drives the turbine. So this one here is for the water wheel, this one here is for the turbine. They completely rearranged the underneath of the mill when they put the turbine in.
And you had to piece that together?
Yeah.
You discovered it?
Yeah. A lot of scratching.
Have you found that in other mills that you've since researched?
I've never seen anything like that before.
So, so the river would have been dammed there.
There's a-
And
there's-
the course of the river would have come into the pond and then into the water wheel.
Right, there's a dam right here. It's right beside the end of the building. There's a little scenic lookout there. That blocked the dam here, which flooded all this, which is the parking lot now. And it flooded upstream up to Gene Rotner's house. It was all part of the mill pond. But even at that, even as you store all that water under the bridge, around the corner, up behind Gene's house, when they ran the mill, they could only run for 4 hours, and they ran out of water. So they worked 4-hour days. Even though they had all that expanse of water, it wasn't that much from a mill point of view.
You felt? When Craig Lehman, who's been coming down and consulting with us from time to time, he was working back there in the 60s and up to like 1970.
Right.
I believe he'd said that the mill pond was still there up until that time.
Yeah, the mill pond was there until I think 72. They even still use the planer. There's a planer inside there, driven by the water, and
Until they had a little accident with it.
until they were doing custom planing for a customer and there's blades, sharp blades that spin real fast to make a nice smooth piece of wood. And Jerry was down there with, I don't know if with Craig or someone, and one of the knives flew out from the planer, went right by Jerry's head. And at that point, Carl Poole said, "That's it, we're done." And that was the end of the mill part. Lots of stories to tell. In 1860-something, there was a kid playing down here, fell in the pond, and the water was rushing out of the pond over the dam, and the kid was getting sucked into that, and some guy, I can't remember his name, was the local fella, jumped in and saved the kid. One of the partridge people from Pemaquid Beach, they were using the portable mill, and I can't remember which partridge it was, but it was the head guy, the progenitor of the line, was leaning over the saw to get something, cut himself right in half.
Lincoln.
Lincoln Twinell.
Lincoln Cornell, yeah.
Yeah, I met him in the 70s, and he showed the medal that his grandfather or whatever got for rescuing.
Yeah.
That's Lincoln.
Lincoln Cornell was Betty Riley, Betty, Reg Riley's wife.
Twinell was involved, yeah. I didn't know.
What's she's Lincoln Twinell's daughter.
Yes, her daughter.
Yeah, right.
He was saving somebody who was handicapped.
Any other questions about our project? It continues as long as we can until we just plain don't have any money. But we're hoping this summer to replenish the coffers. We're having a rubber ducky race. That should take care of it.
If you've got water, it helps. It helps.
It all adds up. We have 1,000 ducks now. This is serious business. Do the math, $5 a piece.
Well, thank you all very much. Neill would like to make an announcement.
Big announcement, but yeah, so those of you that have been over to Colonial Pemaquid, I've had, about 4 or 5 years of full staff, which is still, there's 5 of us, but anyway, in mid-July, the 15th and 16th, we're going to have an event that we've had in different derivations for probably about 20 years, but in the last several years I've been making an effort to set it up so it's more thematic and it's not a mishmash of, it was interesting, but of reenactors and Revolutionary War kit and 17th century kit, people making baskets, etc. But this is probably the 3rd year where we're focusing on Wabanaki or indigenous and European watercraft in 17th century Maine. And it's not just got 2 boats there and you can look at them and that's really cool, but it goes beyond that. Why were they being utilized by both indigenous people and the English and French interchangeably, shallops and birch bark canoes? So that they're focusing on the roles that they played in socialization. You want to go see your aunt and her family as an indigenous person, you hop in your birch bark canoe and canoe up to Camden or whatever, avoiding Pemaquid Point, et cetera, or vice versa. You have fishermen, of which there were many in Pemaquid in the 1600s, that were relying on a shallop, which was either decked or undecked, and they could range anywhere from about 16 feet. The one that we have will be on site to a decked one of maybe 40 feet and 10, 15 tons. And they were the workhorses that would go out every day, 6 days a week, and work the crews anywhere from 10 to 12 hours a day, bringing in cod, haddock, but cod was a big money maker. Anyway, we'll have the Virginia, which if any of you followed her story, that's gone on for a long time, about 15 years plus, starting out very modestly, getting no support from Maine Maritime, for example, and now suddenly they're interested in Maine's first ship. She's going to be there for 2 days, the 2 days that we're running the show, tied up, well, actually in Inner Harbor. She can't sail over because she hasn't been approved by Coast Guard to do that, but she'll steam over. Shall will be there. She'll be transporting people from the floats out to the boat. Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. Oh. Anyway, so I have that. We have 2 Penobscot, Chris Alexis folks, and John Bear Mitchell. Some of you may know of them. John Bear teaches at UMO. Chris Alexis is a tribal historian for the Penobscots. They're going to be there talking about the birch bark canoe and the role that it played within the community, and we're going to have a birch bark canoe that Steve Kayard, who is a guy that has been building birch bark canoes in the traditional form for about 40 plus years, and he will be there one day, and Chris and then John Bear will be there on the Saturday, and Jody will be out there on site talking a bit about Samoset and the role that he played in giving a sense as to what was going on with the indigenous folks in the mid-coast Maine in the 1600s. Most people think that they just disappeared. They all died off. They did go through a lot of very difficult situations, both culturally, demographically, spiritually, but they persisted. And so she'll talk a bit about what he represents as far as these people and their relations with the English and French. And anyway, we'll also have my crew that depict fishermen or talk about their story as fishermen. And it should be a great event for 2 days. We're also going to have for select few a thank you dinner Saturday night for essentially the people that are participating and a few other people of lobster steamers, corn on the cob, and some pies from Dot over in Round Pond. Anyway, so
Not be complete without.
yes, yes. So anyway, I brought a few of the flyers. If you want to grab some, they're on the table out back. If not, come on over to the Colonial Pemaquid and we have more, and there'll be more PR as far as getting the word out. But feel free to stop by. Thank you.
Thank you.